This comes as the administration continues to try to show that they are keeping inflation as their top economic priority, and those high gas prices is really what is driving inflation up at this moment. Last week, the president was out in Los Angeles speaking at the Port of Los Angeles, and he took direct aim at these oil companies, specifically calling out ExxonMobil for their high profits, saying that they will make sure Americans know of what these companies are doing. So with this letter, the president is just once again trying to put some pressure on these oil companies to try to offer some relief, increase their supply, as so many Americans are seeing these high gas prices, which is causing major economic anxiety for them and is also a political liability for the president heading into the midterm elections.
All right, it turns out we do have Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm later in the show. We will ask her if and how the White House intends to force these oil companies to refine more gas. So much more on that coming up. Arlette, Christine, thank you both very much. New Day continues right now.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. It is Wednesday, June 15th, and I'm Brianna Keeler with John Berman here in New York. If you don't believe in the climate emergency facing our nation, just open your window or walk outside today. There will be evidence on display in every corner of America. No matter where you live, count on extreme weather, heat warnings, or severe flooding.
In the span of 24 hours, Americans have grappled with all these threats. Violent storms left hundreds of thousands without power in the Midwest, flooded communities in Montana who don't have clean drinking water, and there have even been tornadoes in Chicago. Meteorologist Derek Van Dam is live in Columbus, Ohio, where the mayor has no power, and he's urging residents to go to cooling centers and pools to stay safe. Derek.
Yeah, John, unfortunately, the perfect storm has struck this area. The combination of no electricity and dangerous excessive heat, that is a recipe for disaster. It has made for a hot and uncomfortable night here as well. Remember, record-breaking triple-digit heat easily grabs our headlines, but when temperatures don't cool below 80 degrees in your own house, that is the silent killer. Heat is often the silent killer. We've got excessive heat alerts for over 100 million Americans, including where I'm standing across central Ohio. Thousands of people facing days without the prospect of cooling themselves with electricity. We have American Electric Power, the power company here that serves Ohio, and they have warned residents here that they need to be prepared to not have electricity at least through Thursday. Now, what happened was a line of storms that moved through on Monday night. This was known as a straight line wind event. This isn't a localized tornado that causes damage to a local community. This was a swath of 75 miles of hurricane force winds that basically hammered through the entire state of Ohio, knocking down trees and power poles. That line of wind rode the periphery of a heat dome that has now settled into this area. So there's the combination: storms knocking out power, heat settling in behind it, and no one having the ability to cool themselves. We think about heat and how it impacts people disproportionately. Unfortunately, lower economic status, lower income individuals often don't have access to air conditioning in the first place, but now this is an equal opportunity employer. So many people don't have access to power here, so they won't have the opportunity to cool themselves as well. So people with underlying conditions, particularly vulnerable to this heat. Some advice for individuals: according to authorities, the cooling centers have been extended this morning, and of course, take breaks if you happen to be working outside. The clock is ticking. Remember, John, when the power is out, the heat is on here in the Mid-South.
Yeah, incredibly uncomfortable and also potentially very dangerous.
Right.
Derek Van Dam, our thanks to you.
That's correct.
Joining us now, New York Times Magazine columnist David Wallace Wells. He is the author of The Uninhabitable Earth: Life After Warming. You know, David, and you write, and I think this is very interesting, that we may need to rethink the phrase extreme heat. What do you mean by that?
Events that used to be totally unthinkable. The Pacific heat dome from last summer, one scientist told me, was a 1 in 8 million year event, which means in the absence of global warming, we'd expect it to happen. You'd have to run all of human history 35 times over to see it once. We saw it last summer. We're seeing intense heat across South Asia. It's been going on for 3 months. It's basically been 100 degrees in India and Pakistan for 3 straight months. These were unthinkable events as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. And now there's something like we see them somewhere on the globe almost every day, every week.
How do you manage it while also trying to head it off?
Well, you have to take the measures that your correspondent was just describing. These are, especially if you're older, if you have other conditions, you need to stay out of the outside. You have to try to live in air conditioning, not work outside. But for many parts of the world, India's labor force is half outdoor labor. So this requires a quite dramatic recalibration, redesign of the way many societies around the world live. In places like the U.S., we're relatively lucky. We have things like, common air conditioning. But that's not true for parts of the world that are being hit hardest, and that means that those people are going to be dealing with the biggest impacts, the most severe threats.
Here in the United States, how do you think it will manifest itself the most, or is?
Well, I think we're seeing every summer now there are going to be extreme heat events where whole cities are living in some amount of fear and shutdown. Now, that's not going to be for months at a time, but there will be days where people die and people get sick because of heat, and that's going to become an increasingly common experience. Of course, we also have storms and wildfire and the air pollution that comes from that. In 2020, it was estimated that 350,000 Americans died from air pollution. A lot of that comes from wildfire smoke, and that wildfire is increasing, unfortunately.
When you look at the flooding that we're seeing in Yellowstone, it happens someplace like Yellowstone. It's going to capture a lot of eyes, right, because of that particular location. What is that saying to you? And what is the lesson that we should be taking from this?
Well, the thing that's most striking to me about, these images are incredible, but what's striking to me about the data is how dramatically we're breaking records. So I think they had 3 times as much rainfall, almost 3 times as much rainfall in Yellowstone as the previous record, 3 times the record. Meteorologists, scientists don't expect to see records broken like that. They usually see them broken in tiny, small increments. But now all around the world, we're seeing records broken when the temperature records by 8, 10, 15 degrees, and rainfall records similar, like 2x, 3x. We're just living in an entirely new world, and we're going to have to adapt as well as decarbonize to limit the amount of damage that comes.
You say we have the tools to avoid the worst of what's to come. The question, though, is do people hear the alarm to take action? And we're going to see if they do. We're seeing the images. Do people absorb them? David Wallace Wells, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be here.
So this morning, the results are in, and Donald Trump exacting a measure of revenge on Republicans who moved to impeach him. And this is happening even as the January 6th committee presents evidence that they suggest points to possible crimes by the former president. Trump's political strength is evident. Overnight, South Carolina Republican Congressman Tom Rice was defeated by a Trump-endorsed candidate, and he lost by a lot. He was one of 10 Republicans in the House who voted to impeach the former president, and among the first to face Republican primary voters. We should note another race in South Carolina did not go Trump's way. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who at times was a Trump critic, survived a primary challenge. Other events on primary night, Republican Mayor Flores flipped a Democratic House district in South Texas. This is a special election victory that builds on Republican gains among Latino voters in the region in the 2020 election. Joining us now, CNN senior political analyst John Avlon. Tom Rice voted to impeach Donald Trump, just defeated in a primary by a lot, 24% of the vote. An incumbent getting 24% of the vote in a primary.
It is a brutal loss for Tom Rice, who took a profile and courage stance on Donald Trump's election lies and paid the price. But here's the reality check I want to give, because I know South Carolina, as you all know. This district where he is, around Myrtle Beach, was heavily pro-Trump. So not only do you have a low turnout election, Republican primary, but Horry County, where Myrtle Beach is, for example, part of the district, went 2-1 for Donald Trump. So if you take on Donald Trump in that district, you are looking for trouble, and Tom Rice got it. Now let's shift down one district to South Carolina, one where Nancy Mace, as you pointed out, took her first vote to reject an attempt to overturn the election. Then spent a lot of time doing prevent defense. Well, she won her primary. Key difference is that Joe Biden won Charleston County by 12 points. So you got to look at the context. People are going to say, oh, all the difference here is the strategies they took in the various ways they took were being defiant to Donald Trump. Look at the underlying dynamics of the district, and that'll tell you what's really going on.
Although I will say, Nancy Mace, and again, she's running for re-election, barely won re-election as a Republican,
against a woman who'd won the Republican nomination 4 years ago, ran as a hardcore Trumper, and still lost in this environment.
Let's take a look at Nevada, right? And other places where people who are adherents of the big lie found a toehold. Specifically, we're looking at the Republican Nevada Secretary of State candidate. And what is that going to mean when, if we look a little farther south to New Mexico, for instance, you have a county in New Mexico where local officials would not certify the election because they believe baseless claims about Dominion voting machines. Now, the county commissioner in that county says, no, that's totally baseless. And it seems like eventually they're going to be forced, including one local official who's an insurrectionist. But imagine if they weren't forced ultimately to do this. Imagine if they had a Secretary of State like the Nevada candidate. What does this portend for future elections?
Bad things. And I'm glad you mentioned that New Mexico case because it shows you the chaos that can happen if you have outright insurrectionists, election deniers in positions overseeing elections. Now, look, this Nevada candidate, you've got an election denier potentially running elections in a major swing state. It also could potentially be a problem for Republicans, even as the pendulum swings towards an off-year election, if they put forward candidates who are not acceptable to the moderate majority of voters. So that's a real test. Now, Adam Laxalt won the Republican primary last night. He's a big lie believer. He's also got a name that is gold in the state of Nevada. And he'd lost an election for governor, been previously AG. But you're right to point out the critical importance of these Secretary of State races, because that's where the constitutional crisis will come on a state-by-state level. So you are sign of coming attractions with those kind of elections.
You know, in Texas, the special election there, very interesting, because what you have is a state where Republicans are hoping to make gains among Latino voters, and you have a candidate winning a seat that has been in Democrats' hands for some time.
Absolutely. Look, this is a seat that is 85% Hispanic, has been drawn to be Democrat. Now, this special election, because the Democrat incumbent decided to take off, was very low turnout, 29,000 voters compared to around 200,000 voters who turn out in a typical general. But the fact that a Republican won it, even for a few months, is a huge brushback pitch to Democrats, especially on the back of what you just referred to, which is Hispanics moving more Republican in 2020, particularly in Laredo County, down on the Mexico border on the western side of the state. This is on the eastern side. So this is just more example that Democrats need to wake up to the fact that they cannot take Hispanic votes for granted. We saw it in Florida, entirely different demographic of Hispanics in Texas. But this is something, even though it's going to take place in a few months and it's a low turnout special election, major brushback pitch for Democrats.
Yeah, it is a wake-up call for them
Big
today.
time.
John Avlon, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, the January 6th committee previewing tomorrow's hearing with a summary of what to expect and new testimony from former Trump White House attorney Eric Hirschman about a conversation he had with attorney John Eastman.
The Select Committee will examine President Trump's relentless effort on January 6th and in the days beforehand to pressure Vice President Pence to refuse to count lawful electoral votes. As a federal judge has indicated, this likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes.
Eventually he said, orderly transition. I said, good, John. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it.
All right, joining me now, CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig, former state and federal prosecutor. Elie, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Look, I want to hang on to that Cheney statement for 1 minute there. I want to start with a 30,000-foot view of what this committee is doing. They are saying or suggesting that Donald Trump and his associates committed possible crimes here. They keep throwing that around. What crimes exactly, and how would those be proven?
Yeah, John, lots of broad brush painting here about crimes, criminality. Let's be specific. There are really 3 potential federal crimes at play here. First, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Here's what prosecutors would have to show. An agreement between 2 or more people, that's the legal definition of a conspiracy, to defraud the United States. Does not have to be financial, but here's the real big issue, the sticking point. Did the person have knowledge or willful blindness, turn a blind eye to the truth? And that is why we're seeing the January 6th committee make such an important point about all these people in Donald Trump's inner circle. They knew Donald Trump lost, and they told him to his face he lost. They're looking at that knowledge issue. Second potential crime, obstruction of an official proceeding. Here you have to show that a person attempted to obstruct or impede an official proceeding of the United States. Of course, the counting of the electoral votes by the vice president counts, and this is going to be a focus of the hearing tomorrow. And again, the sticking point here is corruptly. Again, you have to show that knowledge or that willful blindness. Finally, John, the third potential crime at play, the most dramatic one, seditious conspiracy. This is really the same thing as obstructing Congress that we just saw. The big difference, though, is by force. You have to show the use or a plan to use violence or physical force. Now, we do know that leaders and members of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys have been charged with seditious conspiracy by the committee. The question is, does that connect up to people in power? Benny Thompson, the chairman committee, told Jake Tapper the other day they have evidence of conversations between extremist groups and people in Donald Trump's orbit. What do those words mean? What kind of conversations? Who in the orbit? So those are the three potential crimes in play.
Now, we heard Liz Cheney talk about how a federal judge has suggested that crimes may have been committed between John Eastman and Donald Trump there. It gets to the idea of a different standard here for what is criminal, depending on who's saying it.
Yeah, John, what the committee is doing and what a prosecutor would have to do are two very different things, and it's so important that people understand this. First of all, it's not enough for a prosecutor to show that Donald Trump or anyone else's conduct was bad, horrible, dangerous, dishonest, offensive. You have to show a violation of a specific criminal law, like the three that we just ran through. Second of all, of course, a prosecutor has to prove his case beyond a reasonable doubt. The committee, Congress, they have no burden of proof whatsoever. They can say or do whatever they want. And third, this is a one-sided presentation we're seeing from the committee. Now, it's Kevin McCarthy's fault. He has boycotted this thing. But the truth is, we are only getting one side. In a trial, of course, there would be defense lawyers. The defense can put on its own evidence. The defense can cross-examine witnesses. So that makes a big difference. The point is, we can't take whatever the committee's doing and automatically assume it would translate one-to-one over to a criminal case.
All right, there's Merrick Garland right there. What is Merrick Garland and what are prosecutors doing right now?
Great question. Here's what we know. There's a lot we don't know what prosecutors do behind closed doors. Merrick Garland, DOJ has indicted about 800 people related to January 6th, but almost all of them, except one, were physically at the Capitol or stormed the building. The question is he looking at people higher up? Garland has said, we're watching the hearings. I mean, good. He should be. He should already know this. DOJ prosecutors should be surprised by nothing they're seeing. So we'll see what he does. Let's remember the district attorney down in Fulton County, Georgia, Fani Willis, she has a grand jury going right now that's looking at Trump's efforts to interfere with the vote count and the final tally down in Georgia. And finally, as of last night, we learned that the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, says she has opened an investigation into the new allegations we heard from the committee just the other day about potentially fraudulent fundraising. A lot of unknown here. We're not even sure, and the AG did not specify whether she's looking at this civilly, which would just mean a lawsuit, or criminally, but these are the three prosecutors to watch.
All right, Ellie Honig, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We're going to have more on the news out of the White House this morning. President Biden sending a stern warning to oil companies as gas prices hit record highs.
Plus, we'll speak to the police chief investigating the murder plot of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh as we hear the 911 call the suspect made on himself. And the FDA meets today on COVID vaccines for children under 5 years old. What parents need to know ahead.
Africa Avant-Garde in association with Access Bank. More than banking.
We need to start developing more writers. As a producer, I'm always on the lookout for new voices, new writers, because those are the foundations of good storytelling.
The best advice I've ever received is to never stop writing, because once you start practicing the thing that you want to get good at, you start having all those inflicting thoughts of, am I good enough?
To find your voice as a filmmaker or to tell stories that have deep impact, they have to be stories that affect you yourself. If it doesn't affect you, you can't translate that into a story. Whatever you write will be superficial. So first, if you're going to tell a story that is honest, it has to be honest to you first.
Monday, let's lift every voice. A CNN concert event. The Roots, Khalid, Janae Aiko, Earth, Wind & Fire, Yolanda Adams, and for the first time ever, an all-black symphony orchestra takes the stage at the Hollywood Bowl, and so much more. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
In China, no wallet, no problem. Here, using an app on your phone to make purchases is an everyday practice. The industry so far has been dominated by private companies. That could soon change. China's new digital currency, known as the e-yuan, made headlines at the Winter Olympic Games, a centralized virtual form of currency that can be used just like money across the country.
I think the rollout at the Beijing Olympics is designed in some ways to show the flag internationally.
Other parts of the world have similar ambitions. The European Central Bank announced plans to create a digital version of the euro, aiming to achieve this milestone by 2026. The United States, the world's biggest economy, is currently in the research phase of its own digital dollar, but will not yet proceed, citing concerns around financial stability and privacy.
My name is Øystein Jensen. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Odfjell SE. It is important that shipping becomes sustainable. It is important that shipping moves towards zero because we are a part of the global value chain. We represent 2.8% of the total emission, and that emissions will still grow as the shipping industry will grow because the global demand for transportation is growing. And so the only solution is actually to go zero. Thank you to Sustainability Live. Being an event like this, I believe that is important because it gives you the wider understanding of the challenge. It gives us insight to areas that we haven't thought about, because this challenge is nothing one company can solve by themselves. So that's why we need to collaborate, and we need to collaborate across the industry.
I'm Eleni Jokos in Dubai, and this is CNN.
Here in just a few hours, the Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates by up to 3/4 of a percentage point. So what will this mean for you? Let's bring in financial expert Jean Chatzky, the CEO of HerMoney.com and the co-host of the radio show Everyday Wealth. Okay, Jean, so what does this mean? What does this mean just for someone who is watching this and wants to know, how is this going to affect me and when?
So basically, all of the money that you are borrowing is going to become more expensive. If you've got a variable rate credit card, and all credit cards these days are basically variable rate, the interest rate on a balance that you don't pay off the month that you accrue those charges is probably sitting around an average of 16% right now. That's going to go up, right? And it's going to go up very, very quickly. So we've seen mortgage rates going up. Auto loan rates are going to go up. On the flip side, if you've got money in a savings account, you're going to eventually earn a little bit more money on those savings. Unfortunately, banks don't increase those rates as fast as they increase the rates on loans, but there will be a bit of a leveling effect.
Yeah, debt is more expensive. And funny how the banks don't give you the savings rate increases quite as fast as they make the loans more expensive. Listen, mortgages, what you pay for a house, or what you would pay if you were going to buy a house 6 months ago, your average monthly mortgage payments would be less than what you're paying now. And that's just real money, right?
Significantly less. And with mortgages, it's interesting because you're getting hit with this incredibly hot housing market in addition to rising mortgage rates. So if you look at a comparison, the median home price of a home in the first quarter of this year, about $428,000, that's about $40,000 more expensive than it was in the first quarter of last year. You couple that with mortgage rates that are now heading towards 6% very, very quickly compared to 3% last year, and you're looking at a monthly payment that's about $300 more every single month, right? You multiply that over the course of a year, and you're right. It's real money, and it makes homes unaffordable for a lot of people. It also means that if you're going out to buy a home, right, if you're going out to shop for a mortgage, you need to give adjustable rate mortgages a good look for the first time in well over a decade. And the way to do that is actually to look at what we call hybrid adjustable rate mortgages that are fixed for the first 5, 7, or 10 years of that loan before they begin adjusting. The rate on a 5/1 ARM right now is a little under 4%, so that's a significant savings.
If you've been priced out of this market just by the hot home market, but you're also kind of finding yourself edged out because the interest rates are high and it is costing more, when are you going to see that relief, where maybe you were on the cusp of affording your first home or going to a second home? When are you going to be able to do that?
You're going to see, I believe, the relief in home prices before you see the relief in mortgage prices. And what we're seeing, particularly because consumers are able to work remotely these days more than they have been ever before, is that people are expanding the range in properties that they're looking at. They're looking across state lines. They're looking in different neighborhoods. And so you have to sort of take that sort of a strategy into your home shopping process and bide your time. You know, this is one of those environments where you've got to accrue a greater down payment, where you may have to just sit on your urge to buy a house for 6, 12 months until we start to see the market shake out a little bit.
People have to make decisions that they did not have to make several months ago. Things are changing. Jean Chatzky, thanks so much for helping us this morning.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So do what past presidents have not. The new plea from the families and survivors of September 11th ahead of President Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia.
And how the sister of the man charged with plotting to kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh convinced him to call 911 on himself. You'll listen to the chilling audio.
Times 10. Get a Glow SIM today and enjoy 1,000 Naira sign-on bonus for voice and data. All new and existing Glow subscribers also get 10 times the value of their every recharge, plus up to double their data recharge as bonus. All Glow subscribers also get up to free 20,000 Naira bonus for voice and data.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
I'm Matthew Chance in Kyiv, and this is CNN.
Welcome to The Lead. We begin with breaking news. The United States has plunged into a recession. We're seeing infections at an all-time high. What's your reaction to that? Here are the facts.
The Lead with Jake Tapper. Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts.
We're learning more about our alleged plot.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
I'm Selena Wang in Beijing, and this is CNN.
We're learning some new details about the man who is charged with plotting to kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Police say his sister convinced him to call 911 as he was standing near the judge's home. And here's a portion of that 911 call that he made.
Do you need medical attention?
I need psychiatric help.
Do you have access to any weapons?
Yes, I brought a firearm with me, but it's unloaded and locked in a case.
And you said you came from California. Do you know someone down here?
Brett Kavanaugh. Rex,
Rex.
the Supreme Court Justice.
FBI officials say that the 26-year-old was upset about the leak of the Supreme Court opinion related to abortion rights. He was also upset about an upcoming gun case and the school shooting that occurred last month in Uvalde, Texas. Joining us now is the chief of the Montgomery County, Maryland Police Department, Marcus Jones. Can you just tell us, Chief, a little bit more about this 911 call?
Yes. On that particular evening, the individual that was arrested had made the 911 call, and we would later find out that he had actually arrived in a taxi cab at near the residence of Justice Kavanaugh, at which point in time he began to walk down the street to actually to see the residence, where he observed the U.S. Marshals who were actually there guarding the U.S. Supreme Court Justice and his family. And so the individual decided to continue to walk by, but in the meantime he texted his sister to tell her what his intentions were, at which point in time she convinced him to actually to pick up the phone and call 911 to basically turn himself in and not to do what he had planned to do.
He observes the marshals. He's carrying quite a bit of equipment with him. Is that right?
Oh yes, that's correct. It was interesting that he had a suitcase full of equipment and literally no clothes, that he actually flew from California to the Washington, D.C. area in order to actually to carry out this plot.
Did the marshals, he sees them, did the marshals see him?
They did, but again, he was on the street, on the residential street. There was, at that point in time, there was nothing outside of them just being observant that tipped them off that that was his intention. And again, he continued to walk by the residence. He didn't stop near the residence and do, for example, surveillance. He just simply observed them and continued to walk until he contacted his sister.
Have you heard from the suspect's sister?
We have not heard from, again, this investigation has been turned over to the FBI for any follow-up in regards to the investigation. So we have not heard anything further from the sister with my agency.
He walks down the street after seeing the marshals. How far past the house was he as he was sitting there and making his phone call?
Right. So he walks literally down the street around the corner. He's not actually arrested on the same street as the justice, but he's in the neighborhood. So when the 911 call comes in, our dispatcher did an excellent job. Our call taker did an excellent job of talking to the individual, gathering the information to be able to relay that to our officers, who in turn communicated with the U.S. Marshals about this individual nearby in the neighborhood. But he never was anywhere near the, at least in eye contact with the Marshals. At that point, he was around the corner when our officers were able to locate him and then to be able to place him under arrest.
What more do you know about his plan? What his plan was to presumably go to the House?
Well, I would just say this. I think his plan was, if he could have, if there was the opportunity to, I think he had significant plans to actually break into the residence. I think he had actual plans to actually do what he said he was going to do. And I think from the standpoint that I think he might have also committed suicide if he was able to pull this event off. But beyond that, I mean, we don't, again, based upon him really not, he thought it out. He actually knew exactly where he was going, but what further information he had, I don't have any information as it relates to that. But it just seemed to me that would have been his ultimate plan, was to break into the residence in order to try to assassinate the justice.
As we've seen some protests outside of the homes of justices, have you enforced the federal law that bars protests like that? How are you handling that?
So here in Montgomery County, we are, again, our local police department for the county. We do not enforce federal law. We do have state and local laws that pertain to protest. So we have had several protests in this Chevy Chase area, and we have, basically done what we have traditionally done as it relates to any protest for any individual when it comes to groups or individuals protesting at residences. And that means that we have these specific rules that people have to abide by. They are allowed to be in the neighborhoods, but they must continuously walk. They cannot stand specifically in front of a neighborhood with signs and bullhorns and yelling at the residents. They must not block sidewalks, and they must not block the streets. And if they violate any of those particular items, then we those particular regulations, then we will arrest them, and we basically inform them of any protest that we have at the residences, particularly that we've had recently at Supreme Court's justices' homes. We make sure that we tell them this information so that they are clear on the law. And so generally over the past couple of months, that has been fruitful for them to understand, and we've had no arrests to this point.
Chief Jones, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we continue to follow the news this morning of President Biden's warning to oil companies. We'll be joined by Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm ahead.
Plus, a former Russian president suggests Ukraine may not exist in 2 years. This is Ukrainian military officials say the fight in the east is growing more difficult. And ahead of the FDA's decision on vaccines for younger kids, answers for parents' pressing questions.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
I've been traveling through memories of my life, learning something new each and every time.
Mindy Kincaid in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
On the next Living Golf, discover the history of the sport in Sweden. How do they keep producing some of the world's best golfers? Hear from rising stars.
I think it's just more fun when a Swede wins.
Then visit the region's flagship event, the Scandinavian Mixed, and sit down with Europe's next Ryder Cup captain, Henrik Stenson.
This is where it all started for me.
Living Golf, Saturday on CNN, in association with Gulf Saudi. Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran. We are in Jerusalem.
Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective.
I'm Isa Suarez in London. I'm going to take you live to the British House of Commons now. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is speaking. Let's have a listen.
Deputy Speaker, we aim to relocate the first people from our country who arrived here through dangerous and illegal means, including by small boat. Over the course of this week, many and various claims to prevent relocation have been brought forward. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the decisions of our domestic courts, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and Supreme Court to uphold our right to send the flight. However, following a decision by an out-of-hours judge in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, minutes before our flight's departure, the final individuals remaining on the flight had their removal directions paused while their claims were considered. I want to make something absolutely clear today, Madam Deputy Speaker. The European Court of Human Rights did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but they prohibited the removal of 3 of those on last night's flight. Those prohibitions last for different time periods, but are not an absolute bar on their transfer to Rwanda. Anyone who's been ordered to be released by the courts will be tagged while we continue to progress their relocation. While this decision by the Strasbourg Court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun. Our domestic courts were of the view that the flight could go ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, the case for our partnership with Rwanda bears repeating. We are a generous and welcoming country, as has been shown time and time again. Over 20,000 people have used safe and legal routes to come to the UK since 2015. And most recently, Madam Deputy Speaker, Britons have opened their hearts and their homes to Afghan nationals and Ukrainian nationals. But our capacity to help those in need is severely compromised by those who come here illegally. And as we've discussed in this House many, many times, who seek to jump the queue because they can afford to pay the people smugglers. It is illegal. It is not necessary because they are coming from other safe countries. It is not fair either on those who play by the rules or on the British taxpayers who have to foot this bill. We cannot keep on spending nearly £5 million a day on accommodation, including that of hotels. We cannot accept this intolerable pressure on public services and local communities. It makes us less safe as a nation because those who come here illegally do not have the regularised checks or even the regularised status. And because evil people smuggling gangs use the proceeds of their ill-gotten gains to fund other appalling crimes that undermine the security of our country. It is also lethally dangerous for those who are smuggled. People have drowned at sea, suffocated in lorries, and perished crossing territories. The humane, decent and moral response to all of this is simply not to stand by and let people down, or to be sold into slavery, or to be smuggled, but to stop this. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, inaction is not an option, or at least not a morally responsible one. This is, as I've said repeatedly, a complex, long-standing problem. The global asylum system is broken, and between 80 to 100 million people are now displaced, and others are on the move, seeking better economic opportunities. And an international problem requires international solutions. The UK and Rwanda have shown the way forward by working together. And this partnership sends a clear message that illegal entry will not be tolerated, Madam Deputy Speaker, while offering a practical, humane way forward for those who arrive to the UK via illegal routes. It has saddened me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see Rwanda so terribly misrepresented and traduced in recent weeks. It is another example of how all too often critics not only don't know what they're speaking about, but seek to vilify another international country that has a good track record when it comes to refugees and stepping up to international responsibilities. Rwanda, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a safe and secure country with an outstanding track record of supporting refugees and asylum seekers. And indeed, we are proud that we are working together. Proud that the UK is investing in Rwanda and helping that great country to thrive. And proud that those who are relocated to Rwanda will have an opportunity to thrive as well. They will be given generous support, including language skills, vocational training, and help with starting their own businesses or finding employment. But of course, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, the usual suspects, with the blessings of honourable and right honourable members opposite, have set out the thought and even campaign against these efforts, and with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, the will of the British people. It would be wrong to issue a running commentary over ongoing cases, but Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to say this. This government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable legal last-minute challenges, nor we will allow mobs, Madam Deputy Speaker, to block removals. We will not stand idly by and let organised crime gangs, who are despicable in their nature and their conduct, evil people, treat human beings as cargo. We will not accept that we have no right to control our borders, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will do everything necessary to keep this country safe, and we will continue our long and proud tradition of helping those in genuine need. Now, many of us have met refugees, both abroad and on British soil, and listened to the stories that are quite frankly chilling and heartbreaking. But of course it suits the benches opposite to pretend that this side of the House doesn't care. But Madam Deputy Speaker, as you referred to in the earlier point of order, on this side of the House, such accusations are a grotesque slur. And let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, what is truly chilling is listening to opponents going on about how awful this policy is, while offering no practical solutions, while lives are being lost, helping develop safe and legal routes to this country for those who really need them is absolutely at the heart of this government's work. And having overseen efforts to bring to the UK thousands of people in absolute need, including from Hong Kong, Syria, Afghanistan and Ukraine, And I am the first to say that controlled immigration is good for our country, outstanding for our country, including that by refugees. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we simply have to focus on the support of those who need it the most, and not those who have picked the UK as a destination over a safe country like France. And it is no use pretending that they are fleeing persecution when they are travelling from a safe country, because our capacity to help is not infinite, and public support for the asylum system will be fatally undermined if we do not act. And along with the critics of the Migration and Economic Development Partnership have no alternative proposal to deal with uncontrolled immigration. And like on so many other issues, the parties opposite, the Labour Party and the SNP, are on the wrong side of the argument, and we will only see with their arguments public trust in the system being corroded. That is irresponsible and utterly indifferent to those who we seek to help and support. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have always said that I will look at all proposals to reduce illegal migration and illegal entry to our country, and even those that the opposite benches might prepare to put forward, but we still wait for them. However, well, he says that. However, fundamentally, they don't think there is a problem, and that is why they don't have a solution, because they still remain and stand for open borders, pure and simple. Meanwhile, this government wants to get on with delivering, not just on what the British people want, but reforming our systems, so yes, so that they are firm, but equally, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that they are fair to those who pay for them and fair on those who need our help and support.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a shambles, and it is shameful, and the Home Secretary has no one but herself to blame. This is not, and never has been, a serious policy, and she knew that when she chartered the plane. She knew that among the people she was planning to send to Rwanda on this plane were torture and trafficking victims. She knew she didn't have a proper screening process in place. She knew that some of them might be children. So can she confirm it was the Home Office itself that withdrew a whole series of these cases on Friday and yesterday because they knew there was a problem with these cases, that even without the European Court of Human Rights judgment, she was planning to send a plane with just 7 people on board because she'd had to withdraw most of the cases at the last minute. She knows that there is a lack of proper asylum capacity in Rwanda to make fair decisions, that as the UNHCR says, they only normally deal with a few hundred cases a year. There's normally only one eligibility officer who prepares the cases, and that's as well as the lack of interpreters or legal advice to ensure fair decisions. Now, she promised there will be extra payments to Rwanda for each person that is transferred, presumably to pay for those extra caseworkers or extra support, but she still refused to tell us how much. So what is she hiding? Will she tell us now how much she promised Rwanda for each of the people she was planning to send yesterday, and how many Rwandan refugees she promised to take in return? She knows that serious concerns have been raised about Rwandan restrictions on political freedom, on the treatment of people who are LGBT, on the fact that 12 refugees were shot by the authorities in 2018 for protesting against food cuts, on the fact that there have been Afghan and Syrian asylum seekers returned by Rwanda, and she knows that none of those concerns have been addressed. She knows too that the policy will not work. We need action to tackle dangerous criminal gangs who are putting lives at risk. But she knows that her policies won't achieve that, and that is not their objective. Because if it was, she would not have asked the National Crime Agency, whose job it is to target the criminal gangs, to draw up 20% staff cuts. That is potentially 1,000 people being cut from the organisation that works to tackle the gangs. So can she confirm concern, has she asked the NCA to draw up plans for staff cuts?
Yeah.
If she was serious, she would be taking seriously the fact that the Israel-Rwanda deal ended up increasing criminal people trafficking and smuggling, and that her plan risks making things worse. And if it was, she would be working night and day to get a better joint plan with France to crack down on the gangs and to stop the boats being put into the water in the first place. But she isn't, because her relationship with French ministers has totally broken down. If she was serious about tackling illegal migration, illegal economic migration, or cutting the bills for people in her